the veteran who sparked a revolution. In the quiet town of Maple Cross, tucked between rolling hills and faded railroad tracks, a single act of cruelty became the spark that ignited a national reckoning. The snow fell in soft spirals that winter evening, blanketing the sidewalks and rooftops in a peaceful white shroud. People hurried through the chill, ducking their heads beneath hoods, their breaths visible in the air. But one man walked with a steadier pace, unbothered by the cold. His name was Daniel Harris. Broad-shouldered and quiet, he wore a weathered army jacket that still bore the faint patch of the 82nd Airborne. His boots were cracked from use, his pants frayed at the edges. To a passerby, he may have looked like just another man down on his luck. But Daniel was a veteran. 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star, and a burden of memories too heavy for any man to carry alone. As he reached the glowing windows of the 24-hour diner called the Copper Cup, Daniel paused. His breath fogged in the glass as he looked in at the warmth inside the coffee steam, the laughter, the soft clink of silverware. It had been days since he'd had a real meal. The modest veteran's check in his pocket meant tonight, at least, he could afford one. He brushed the snow from his shoulders, straightened his spine, and stepped in. The bell above the door jingled. Conversations paused. Heads turned. A mother pulled her child closer. A man in a business coat shifted uncomfortably and clutched his wallet. Daniel said nothing, only offered a respectful nod to the room and moved to a counter stool with clear sight lines to the front and back exits, an old habit. He didn't expect comfort, just decency. That evening, the only kindness came from a young waitress named Harper Ellis. 23 and saving for nursing school, she noticed the military patch on Daniel's jacket, the worn dog tags tucked beneath his shirt, and the sharp clarity of a man who'd seen too much. "Can I get you something to eat, sir?" she asked. "Coffee," Daniel replied, his voice steady. "And whatever the special is." Harper smiled, offered him the meatloaf plate, and poured his cup. "It's good to have you here," she said, and meant it. But not everyone felt the same. In a booth in the corner, 2 police officers, Sergeant Clyde Danner and Officer Rick Holton, had been watching. They came in every Thursday night, parked themselves for hours, and made sure everyone knew whose authority ruled Maple Cross. "You counting the silverware yet, Harper?" Danner called across the diner, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hope you locked the bathroom," Holton added. "Wouldn't want our guests leaving behind more than a tip." The laughter from their booth cut through the diner like a knife. Harper's hands trembled as she delivered Daniel's plate. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. Daniel didn't look up. He didn't flinch. He simply picked up his fork and said quietly, "I've faced worse in Kandahar." The humiliation continued. Holton swaggered over, sat beside Daniel uninvited, and began a mocking interrogation disguised as friendly chatter. "Where do you serve, really?" he said, sipping from his coffee. "Or is that jacket just for show?" "I served," Daniel replied, lifting his gaze. "And I earned every thread of this uniform." "Well," Danner muttered as he came up behind, "you're making the place look bad. Time to move on." "I've paid for this meal," Daniel said calmly, "and I intend to finish it." The officers' smiles faded. Tension climbed. Holton reached out and grabbed Daniel's shoulder. It was Harper who intervened first. "Officers," she said, "please, he hasn't done anything wrong. You want to up like him?" Danner snapped. "Mind your business." But Harper wasn't just standing behind a counter. She had already slipped her phone into her apron pocket and pressed record. When they dragged Daniel outside and slammed him against their cruiser, his dog tags spilled onto the snowy pavement. Holton stomped on them and kicked them into the snowbank. "Oops," he sneered. "Guess you're not such a hero." Daniel looked Harper in the eye and said the words that would change everything. "If something happens to me," he told her, "call Brigadier General Samuel Grayson. Pentagon. Tell him Daniel Harris is in trouble." At first, Harper thought he was delusional. A man with no home claiming he had friends at the Pentagon? But she found his dog tags in the snow. She read his name. She felt the weight of those cold metal discs in her palm. And when her shift ended, she stood in the back room of the diner, hands shaking, phone in hand. She called. Within 2 hours, General Grayson was pacing the floor of his Washington, D.C. office. 20 years ago, Daniel had saved his life in a firefight outside Kandahar, carried him on his back through a hail of bullets, refused extraction until the last soldier was safe. Now, it was Grayson's turn. Within 4 hours, internal affairs from the Department of Defense arrived in Maple Cross. Within 6, Daniel was released. Within 12, an investigation was opened. And within 72 hours, the conspiracy began to unravel. It started with quiet interviews and discreet subpoenas. But what they uncovered went far beyond 2 road cops. There was a network inside the Maple Cross Police Department officers working with a private contractor called Valor Edge. Their goal? Drive out the homeless, especially veterans, from targeted neighborhoods so that Valor Edge could quietly buy up property, flip it, and profit off gentrification. They called themselves the Watchmen. They used coded language, created fake reports, destroyed evidence, silenced whistleblowers. But they hadn't planned for Harper, or for Daniel, or for a civil rights lawyer named Naomi Price, who arrived the next week, briefcase in hand, fire in her voice. With Daniel's permission, she filed a federal suit naming names, demanding accountability. And as the case gained media attention, more came forward. Homeless veterans across the region began sharing their stories. People who had been arrested without cause, assaulted, dumped outside city limits in freezing temperatures. They weren't nameless anymore. They were brothers, sisters, heroes, survivors. Daniel testified before Congress. His voice broke when he spoke of his wife, gone too soon due to a bureaucratic delay in medical treatment, of the house he lost, the job he couldn't keep, the nightmares that chased him from shelter to shelter. But he ended with words no one would forget. "You didn't break me," he said, "but you did wake me." In the months that followed, multiple officers were arrested. Valor Edge executives were indicted. The DOJ issued new oversight guidelines for interactions between police and vulnerable populations. Grants were allocated for homeless veteran programs across the country. In Maple Cross, the town that tried to erase Daniel Harris became the first in the state to open a fully funded veteran resource center. Harper was its first director. And Daniel? He moved into a small home not far from the diner. Every morning, he ran a coffee group at the center, a place for vets to talk, to laugh, to remember. His eyes were still watchful, his steps still measured. But the weight he carried was shared now, lightened. Some evenings, when the snow began to fall again and the streets grew quiet, he'd walk to the Copper Cup and sit at the same stool. A new waitress would greet him with a smile. "This special." And Daniel would nod, not because he needed the food, but because, in a place where he was once humiliated, he had reclaimed his dignity. And in doing so, he'd helped thousands find theirs.